Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to Creative Piecemeal. Today I'm joined by an amazing person, M.K. Haley. She has more than 25 years of experience at Walt Disney Imagineering in themed entertainment design, production, and R&D. She's also taught computer animation, game design, and themed entertainment design at Carnegie Mellon, Florida State, and UCLA. And she has over 30 years of service to industry associations. She is a huge supporter of the ACM SIGGRAPH conference planning process, as well as the Themed Entertainment Association Conferences and Academic Society, and she presently teaches at UT Austin. Welcome to the show.
Good day. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you on and to catch up. It's been a little while since we've seen each other, since the 2007 Imagineering conference. That was such a wonderful time. And you were an Imagineer for 25 years, and you've done lots of things in the creative world. And I'm wondering, how did your creative journey start?
Well, it's not a story that people like to hear because it's non-traditional, right? Everyone wants to think there's a door, you knock on it, you go through, woohoo! But particularly in themed entertainment, and a lot of creative arts, actually, theater, television, film, because it's a project-based industry, it's less of a straightforward process. So I'm a kid from Massachusetts, right? I had never been to a Disney theme park or a large theme park. I didn't know anyone who had, right? It just wasn't even on our radar. I thought I was going to go to school for phys ed. And I went to UMass Amherst for college, and I had asked the program if they had design, graphic design, because I like that. And my parents are like, you're pretty good at that in high school. You got ribbons, do that. Can you imagine parents suggesting I get an art degree? That's outrageous. And so in my head, I'm like, well, graphic design feels like a part of design where you get paid for it. And the university sent me a letter back saying they apologized. I didn't have anything in design. So I was registered for phys ed. And then I showed up and, at orientation, we got a tour and I saw the amazing design program. And I'm like, what the what? So when we showed up, when freshmen show up a few days before anyone else, I took that letter to the design department. They're like, bad. And they immediately dropped all my phys ed classes and added me to the design program. And the university had just started, my freshman year, would have been the first year, a computer animation program. And I'm like, this was in the 80s. I'm like, computers, like those might hang around. I should maybe learn about that. So I studied computer animation. That's how I got involved in SIGGRAPH, which is a special group in computer graphics and interactive technologies. And then when I graduated that Pixar had just started putting out their first things, I'm like, I can't do that yet. I need more school. So I did a little research as to who was doing what interesting. There was a really adorably bananas piece came out of UC San Luis Obispo called Where's Frank? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to go there because there's some students doing some cool stuff there. I moved from Massachusetts to California. And so I applied. Turns out those two gentlemen were in the mechanical engineering department, just like mucking around on computers. They weren't taking any animation or design classes. So UC San Luis Obispo, I was like, well, this is not the place for her. She doesn't want to be an engineer. And they forwarded me to Cal State LA. Cal State LA did have a computer graphics animation program. They also had a partnership with JPL, an artist in residence partnership with NASA's JPL. And so they forwarded my materials and I was accepted by and graduated from a program I never applied to. And while I was at Cal State, Walt Disney Imagineering, which is the division of Disney that designs theme park, cruise ships, and resorts, invited our university to participate in a student design challenge. Imagineering did then, and to this day, still struggles to hire, which feels outrageous, right? Because they get hundreds of applications per internship or job, and they're not qualified. They're folks who love the end product and who therefore think they're qualified to do the job. And so Imagineering has tried to do outreach programs to clearly communicate, here's the skill set necessary to make that thing. A quote I've stolen from Jesse Schell, who was a colleague of mine, both at Imagineering and at Carnegie Mellon, is just because you like taking baths doesn't mean you can be a plumber. It helps, right, if you understand the IP and the property, but you need to have that solid foundation. So in an effort to provide a pipeline for the talent and the diversity, right? Like Disneyland, great job, all white guys, right? And Imagineering absolutely did not reflect the guests coming through the front gate, and so they needed some more diversity in the project. So my dean asked me to submit something. I was all like, I don't know a thing about. I've never been to Disneyland, and he's like, you don't have to be good at it, right? Just do something so we look like we participated, and then next year we'll get our act together. So I did that, the Imaginations student design competition. I didn't win, but I was runner up, and I won the internship that was on the table. And I stayed for 28 years. The internship was supporting the Aladdin Virtual Reality Lab at Epcot, which was the first attempt at storytelling in virtual reality and the first attempt to put VR in front of the average American, right? It was put in front of guests, and it was a legit research lab. We surveyed 75,000 guests, far more rode the magic carpet, but 75,000 filled out surveys after their ride. It gives a lot of information on common practices, nausea, how do people follow directions, understand rules in virtual spaces. Then I just didn't leave. I just stayed. I was there. I was in the Florida office for about 9 months, and then relocated back to the Glendale, California office to work in the VR studio overall. And then R&D absorbed the VR studio, and then that's how I started my journey in the R&D group. I know a lot about what makes people barf.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. I would be one of those people that would not be able to ride any of those or use any of the VR stuff. Like, yeah, I'm way too sensitive.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting is it's taken far too long to understand the idiosyncrasies of that. Almost all VR systems were designed by men who accidentally forgot that women have completely different perception systems, and men and women get dizzy, nauseous, disorientated for different reasons. And so it is not optimized. Still, it is not optimized for women. There's very little research on children. There's some, but not a lot on how long is safe for a child to stick their head in there. And I have a fairly small interocular distance. So none of the VR HMDs fit me right. I'm always doing it with one hand and futzing with the other to get it in front of my eyes. So for some applications, it's really invaluable. And for others, it's just not there yet. And I don't know if it'll ever be there. Because as you said, like if you have a depth perception issue, if you have a small interocular or an exceedingly large interocular, if there's nausea or disorientation, like it ain't for everyone, but it has allowed for some really interesting developments in particular. What fascinates me most is pain reduction. There's some really great things happening in the reduction of chronic pain, particularly for long term. You know, if you're having burn wounds debrided or labor, VR systems can do a great job at reducing the needs for opiates, and that is not trivial at all.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
in fact, some of the earliest applications of VR were post traumatic stress disorder and phobias. Great, even low hertz graphics. We're having some great success in those spaces, and that has really continued. It's AR is where the common man is getting really legitimate, more consistent value in these virtual overlay systems, right? I mean, in Pokemon Go is the one that put it in everyone's hands, where they understood an overlay into your real world with virtual imagery. And so whether it's auto repair or maps in a city overlaid on things, these tools allow you to not only tell stories in different ways, it gives you real world educational information.
Is there anything that you're allowed to talk about that you're working on right now that you're really excited about?
Nothing I work on is secret anymore. I can talk about everything because I work at a publicly funded university. One of my favorite pins in the themed entertainment industry is it looks like a little scroll and it says, "All my best work is under NDA." Right. So I appreciate that you need to ask that. Most of these companies are publicly traded, and so revealing information about what is coming out is dicey, and then also how you did it. Right. There's a lot of confidentiality around any of the emerging tech. So right now it's such an interesting time, right? My friends who are art history professors are like, "Whew, you chose a dicey career," because for the most part, a lot of their lectures haven't changed in a long time. Art history lectures. Every semester, and sometimes in the middle of the semester, I change up what my lecture topics are and how we're going to explore it because the industry moves very, very fast. A year and a half ago, we were not talking about AI. A year ago, we were.
Mm.
As of this fall, it's in our university syllabus and honor code policy, but that didn't come out until like 4 or 5 weeks into the semester. Like, it's a very dynamic process. What we got, the verbiage that we had to put in our syllabus to explain it was sort of like 3 criteria: nobody, nope, yes with permission, yes do whatever you want, right? Kind of basically.
Mhm.
That was just updated 2 weeks ago to talk about support the process and be less concerned about the end result, because students are terrified of this technology doing them in, right? They're terrified they'll use it wrong, they'll go to jail, it'll do bad things, right? And so we're trying to figure out, we have an obligation to teach students what these tools are and how they'll use them. One of my friends, Michael Libby, does some lovely work with, he owns a company called World Builder that helps simulate dimensional spaces. He's done some really great lectures on the topic. He was embedded in Microsoft for a bit with their AI teams. And one of his quotes that I steal all the time is, AI is not going to steal your job. A designer who knows how to use AI better than you is going to steal your job.
That makes sense.
So the stuff that I'm working on kind of on the side, that is like, I'm just tickled by this. I have accidentally become a bit of a Santa Claus expert. And
Ooh.
I am the only consultant to the Worldwide Santa Forum. I mean, I'll take it, right? It's a very fun group. Several weeks ago, we had a great lecture from a gentleman who runs a place called Reindeer Acres. The topic which sucked me in, and it was the Worldwide Santa community that and just sent me a notice this lecture was happening. They were hosting it. The topic was how you, Santa, right? Because every Santa is an independent contractor. There's no like CEO of Santas. I hope I'm not ruining anything for anyone. The topic was, how do you want to include reindeer in your Santa story? Like, you cannot at all. You can choose myth, folklore, the physiological reality of actual reindeers. Like, there's lots of lenses, but here you go. So the gentleman who owns Reindeer Acres in Wisconsin couldn't be more lovely. And we got a conversation on the history of reindeers and how they connect to winter and Christmas lore. Odin originally traveled around the world on an 8-legged horse, being nice to children and dropping gifts. So there's like that connection. We saw a cross section of a reindeer's nasal cavity to explain how the cold air doesn't kill them. And so, like literally, when I say every lens of reindeer, from Odin to the nasal cavity. And I was invited, how I got connected to the Santas was April 2022 or so. I started getting a lot of LinkedIn requests from Santas, and you're not going to say no, right? It's Santa. And the fourth one, who I now call Santa 1.0, he says, I bet you're wondering why you're getting a lot of Santa requests. I'm like, I am in fact wondering. They had found my TED Talk years ago. I did a TED Talk on influence versus power, and I use Santa as the example, how Santa is influential because we give him that. He doesn't take it by force. And what value that is to American myth, and also the sociocognitive development of very small children. Through the lens of Santa, they learn how to write letters. They can explore technologies, from radar to satellite and tracking Santa. They understand want versus need in a new way. And so there's value in wrapping this story around those skill sets. And it was only 6 minutes, but the Santas had found that. And it was like wildfire going through the Santa community. And so Santa 1.0, his name is Ed Taylor, he said, one of the reasons it has resonated so much with us is you gave a solid value proposition to Santas, who are all mostly volunteers, right?
Mm.
He said, Santas have crushing self-doubt, crushing anxiety. They literally do not feel worthy to fill the boots. And I'm like, it never occurred to me that Santas would question their value at all. Like, who am I, right? Who am I to portray Santa? And they needed to connect what they were doing to some sort of greater good. So they invited me to do their keynote session for the Worldwide Santa Summit, which happens every year. Best Zoom ever, like 350 dudes, red shirt, white hair, red shirt, white hair, red shirt, white hair, MK, red shirt, white hair, red shirt, white. 2 Mrs. Clauses we had, but the rest were Mr. Clauses. And it was about an hour and a half. And they just really embrace this idea of, oh, here's why we do what we do. Here's why this isn't just cosplay. And then that's just blossomed into a lovely relationship for 2+ years now. I've been a consultant on the psychology, tradition, folklore. A lot of Santas are interested in, is it okay to be a Black Santa? To which the answer is yes. By the way, St. Nicholas was Black. He was from what is now modern day Turkey. Santa was a brown-skinned, brown-eyed, black-haired man. Santa 1.0 was concerned about some of the tchotchkes that Santas were given. So he said, let's have a conversation about leaving stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, the artifact of the journey. It's in Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. Like a thing is, and usually it's a candy cane or a picture or something, right? And sometimes it may not be appropriate, but that exchange of a thing is important to the process. So that was good times. And then he's like, let's do more. Like you and I should be like a team. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, you're not going to say no. Right? I'll say no. So the Themed Entertainment Association a year ago in Vegas had put out a call. So this was 2022, fall of 2022. Like, do we know anyone who like actually survived COVID? And like, is there anyone who like thrived? And so I'm like, Santa, you did, right? The Santas figured out very quickly. Well, they figured out going into a mall, standing in a line and standing on Santa's lap is no longer a value proposition, right? It wasn't safe. Hundreds of Santas died of COVID, right? It hit that community very hard, elderly, slightly pudgy men. But they had figured out real fast Zoom. They had taught themselves 3D modeling and built these lovely homes and castles and toy shops that they welcome people into. What they could earn skyrocketed because suddenly they're charging $35 a half hour or something. They can see everyone's face. Usually when your kid visits Santa, you're just looking at the back of his head, right? And suddenly the whole family can engage. So they really figured this out pretty quickly and capitalized on it. So I'm like, Santa, let's talk about that. He's like, okay. So we gave a lecture, about half an hour at the Theme Entertainment Association state conference on how the Santa saved Christmas. And, you know, that cat is out of the bag. You don't go back. Like, you're not going to suddenly not do in-home visits with Santa. So that'll continue to expand. And it was super fun. It was really well received. And then it got into, like, there's a couple of AI systems where kids can chat with Santa. There was a lecture this year. So 2 weeks ago was the same conference in Kansas City. And they had AI discussions, and on the stage they had for and against. And all of the people on the stage were very well-respected industry professionals. And one person is like, how long am I going to sit and talk to an AI bot? And I'm like, oh, I have an answer for that. 17 hours. Some child in a hospital alone, you know, at night, sick, talked to a Santa chatbot for 17 hours last year. And the chatbot doesn't get tired or bored or repeat itself. So there was a lot of technology that we talked about. Santa chatbots, personalized letters. You can type in the data and Santa sends you a letter. And then the Santas who are building their own worlds and visiting guests in their house, which is a far less weird experience, right, than going to the mall and standing in a sweaty mall in your cute dress and being scared and crying, right? So that lecture went over really well. Come the following spring, Santa's like, all right, well, what do we talk about this spring? You'll be our keynote speaker again. And I'm like, Santa, can we just show that video? Like, because a lot of your Santas we talked about in that video, and they recorded it for us. And so that spring, I didn't have to do any work, right? We just called up that, explained to the Santas what we had done, and hit play. And I forgot that we had mentioned them by name: Santa Greg, Santa Mike, Santa Mark. There's autistic Santa. There's different Santas who take different lenses as to the demographic they excel in. And these Santas lost their mind. They have never been credited. Right? Nobody has ever appreciated what they did and how they did. I'm like, oh man, part of me is like, whew, thank goodness I named them, right? When we did the lecture center, I didn't think, oh, and in 8 months we'll show it to these Santas, so we better get their names right. And so I've developed quite this partnership with the Santas. And what's great is how they are super on board with learning new skills, software, hardware, presentation. They are a very supportive community because they're basically 5 to 10,000 independent contractors, right? Nobody's the boss of them. And they really are a very self-serving community. And I hope it never goes away. So our semester this year is a little weird. Thanksgiving falls fairly late on the calendar. Last year, they started giving us the whole week off, right? Because we used to get Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Monday, Tuesday, attendance was 0, right? Like, because parents just pull their kids off the whole week. So you're doing like busy work for the kids who show up. So the university said, well, that's absurd. Let's just start the semester 2 days earlier, give you the whole week. Great. Then I only have 1 more week before my classes are done. And I'm like, okay, I've lost them, right? I see them Tuesday and Thursday, like they're gone. They're on Christmas break already or worried about finals. And one of our requirements is we have to have a guest speaker each semester. So the last big project my students are doing before Thanksgiving break is called Random Acts of Kindness. And it's about guest service being intentional. It's not an accident that you set up systems and processes for great customer service or recovery, right, when things don't go great. So they do that. They disseminate just before Thanksgiving. Bye-bye. Then I grade it over Thanksgiving. And then when they come back, their first guest speaker is Santa because he does it well, and he's published books like this Santa Ed. So I am integrating the Santas into my academic world now, after having just like Santa was a side gig, right?
That
So
is
that's not
so
really on
neat.
my resume, but that's what tickles me. That's what I'm tickled about right now, that I'm touching above and beyond my day job.
I love that. And I love how you've been integrated to use your skills and your creativity in this in a realm that, I mean, pardon the pun, is really magical. I mean, like Santa. What?
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
that's
And
so
like
neat.
right off the bat, I strip it from religion. I'm talking secular Santa. I'm talking about
Oh, of course.
traditions, history, myth. Are most of them connected to some sort of religious? Absolutely. But we're not talking about Baby J or any of that in these conversations. And yeah, it's ubiquitous regardless of your religious affiliation. And I've just been so pleased with what a kind group of people these Santas are. Most of them are retired, right? They don't have to work.
Mm.
So after my first year, the next presentation was artificial hair and beards, proper care and feeding. Right? So I gave my presentation, and then there was like no gracious moment to like log out. So I'm just sitting and I'm like, I felt like such a voyeur because now I'm getting all these hair secrets. By the way, yak fur is the big secret. Yak fur is a beautiful white, bright whitish blue. It takes a curl nicely. Most of the Santas, even who have a beard, will wear an attachment, like a fake beard over it to give it more fullness and more white. So I learned a lot about beards. I have not yet had a reason to apply that, but
That is so cool. We're going to switch gears. What is a book that you read recently that you couldn't put down?
so this is my most recent. I'm holding it up to the camera like this isn't a podcast. This is called Immersive Storytelling for Real and Imagined Worlds. It's by Margaret Carrison. She was the story lead on all of the Galaxy's Edge work that Walt Disney Imagineering recently did on both coasts, East and West Coast. A lot of this is common sense. It's at the bottom here, it says a writer's guide. A lot of this is common sense for, telling great stories, but it's just packaged and communicate in such a way that's very applicable. Like this is a manual / checklist on how to do it. And when you talk about immersive storytelling for real and imagined worlds, Margaret's universe was theme parks, Disney, right? A physical place where you are building physical things all around you. Every single thing in here also works for video games, dimensional virtual worlds. She was part of the badness, right? Her whole team, big chunk of that team was wiped after COVID. She's now working for Airbnb, which feels strange, but Airbnb is trying to be different than just a broker for these houses here and there. They're trying to tell story. They're trying to make you pick a place as a destination, not just, oh, I'm in this town, where do I stay? They've got a lot of themed housing that already existed, right? But they're like bunching those together, like, want to stay in a castle? Here's 20 castles we have in America. Want to stay in a spaceship? Here's 20. So it is very hard to put down. It's really well, like, in quick. It's a quick read, and you're like, oh well, that quick read was just like 8 hours, but it's very applicable. So I appreciate good read, good data, very applicable stuff. And she's done quite a few interviews. So if you're not interested in reading the whole thing, like, tippy toe first into one of her YouTube talks on the book. And then she's got another book coming out in April. So if you become a fan of Margaret Carrison, there's more after this.
Nice. Have you ever thought about writing a book yourself?
No, I don't consider myself a writer. I write things. And writing is an interesting one. It's one of the professions in theme entertainment that have fewer roles than others, right? You don't need 40 show writers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a challenge because everyone thinks they can write, right? Because we all, in fourth grade, we wrote essays. And so I'm a little self-conscious of seeing how many people throw their hat into the ring. People are like, you're not a writer. And so in my head, I'm like, I'm not a writer. But I do keep a lot of data together to share with students. I do a lecture on story to have people understand why story matters so much to us. And Western story and Eastern story are two very different things. And I say, like, this is Western story, beginning, middle, and end, 3-act arc and all that stuff. But no, I have never considered, aside from a manual here and there. I have contributed to quite a few, back to the library. I have contributed to quite a few books. This is called the Imagineering Workout. And so we originally wrote a book called The Imagineering Way, which was tiny, like a little tiny hardback like this. And it was a lot of very reflective. In my day, we did this, and it was hilarious. And the feedback from viewers was like, this is great, but we want a how-to, right? We want to learn how to do the thing, not just hear you talk about the thing. And so this was the follow-up, and everything in gray, again, I'm showing the camera like this is not a podcast. The gray is an activity. So there's these very short chapters, how to set your goals, how to get started on something. And it was very inclusive. We had a whole bunch of brainstorming sessions at Disney on this, and nobody ever told us why. And this book came out of it. And so they came to me and they said, only one, you contributed to like a lot of chapters. Pick the one that you were the only one who contributed to. So I have one chapter that is me, how to brainstorm, and then quite a few chapters that are my team, and our team's name is listed, the effects team. And then quite a few were just the effects team is listed, not the individuals' names, based upon how much credit we were each like. That was really all of us, right? It wasn't one individual. And this is great. Like, so here's the chapter called Changing Perspectives, and you can see all the names at the top. That was several folks on my team, John, Tom, Jack, Joe, Gary, and me, to talk about how to change your perspective to sort of get a different lens on who you're designing for. So I've contributed to that. Marty Scolar, who ran Imagineering for many, many years, he has published some books, and I've contributed to all but one. And again, like imposter syndrome, he reached out to me to contribute to one. And I'm like, Marty, like, really? Like, I'm in a lot of your books. Like, I don't want to be that guy who's like in all your books, and let's give someone else a chance. And now I'm like, why the hell did I say that? Right? Like, he reached out to me for stuff. Like, who else in the world is like, nah, that's too much of me. I think give the public someone new. um, so all but one of Marty's books I have contributed to, and I do regret that. It's like being like, I don't know if it should be me or not. I don't know that I have anything important to say, or like on your third book, Marty, I'm out of important things to say because I said all the important things in the earlier books.
I remember meeting him at the Imagineering, I think it was like the awards banquet.
Mm-hmm. He started the program. He was super proud of it. So Jeffrey Katzenberg had started a writing program with our television group, particularly to get unique voices into the process. And so Marty said, where's my program? Like, we need a different set of voices at Imagineering and the theme parks. And they said, come up with a program and we'll fund it. Boom, Imaginations happened. And so I did it the second year it started. And he was very protective of that program, very protective of his kids who came through that program. Again, they after a while, they wanted to make me the poster child because I came through the program. I didn't win, but I earned an internship and stayed, right? So there's proof that there's a career path there. Arissa McCarron won that year, and she did a Night on Bald Mountain, terrifying elevator drop thing. Great, but I would never ride it. It's so scary. And so that was a good story, right? That I did the contest, and that gave me a career opportunity. And then I was, I think, one of the first to become an executive. And frankly, just because I was old, right? Like I had been there doing it the second year the contest was open. Like I was second in line, right? And so they did want me to do a lot of PR and that to talk about it as a career path. But yeah, Marty was very integral in making that program happy, making sure it evolved in smart ways. And even after he retired, he was still very vested in students. So he emailed me, and it was very late. I was in my Florida office. It was like 9:00, so like 6:00 his time or whatever. And he says, here, I have an interesting idea about students. And he pinged like 5 of us. And so I responded about, yep, let me follow up on that. And then after, I sent him a note that said, I really appreciate that you still have your eye open for us, right? Like you're retired, right? Officially, this is not your job anymore, but you're still very vested in student success. And he died that night. And like, you know how you're always like, I really wish I told people. I told him, like the only person in my life that I told thank you, right? Before I wished I had said thank you. So now I'm trying to do better about that. On social media, I do random acts of kindness where I give shout out to people who are just great customer service or who like went above and beyond, because you never want to not have said that.
Yeah. I've seen that, and it's such a joy to see on your page, especially when things are not always going as harmoniously in the world. It's really nice to see that.
Yeah, I just did some Googling last night. My twin and I have a big birthday coming up. Oh my God, like don't tell her, but her birthday present that I'm making for her is amazing. And my sister has been helping my mom sort of clear out the family home. And she's doing a great job of collecting grade school artwork, photographs, like all medals, like stuff we didn't know existed. And my twin and I were very premature, very tiny, 3 pounds. I was 3.14. I was pi. My pi
Hey.
theory started at birth. And I knew that we were in an incubator for a month before we got to go home. And I knew that had we been born today, right, we would have been very expensive babies because of all the tech necessary to keep us alive. But at that time, they just threw you in an incubator and hope for the best. And so I did a little research. I'm like, okay, at 3.14 pounds, what is the survival rate? So today in 2023, the survival rate is just over 90%. So that's great.
Mm.
The survival rate when I was born was 7%, my twin and I. And I'm like, okay. So on my birthday, my random act of kindness shout out is everybody who worked at St. Margaret's Hospital neonatal unit, right? Because really we shouldn't be alive. Two of us, super tiny, jaundiced / green. My mother's like, she's like, yeah, you were like this weird alien color. Thanks, Mom.
Oh.
But like somebody worked really hard to keep both of us alive.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, but I wouldn't even have known this except like this little card that my sister found talked about what we were fed and how often formula was brand new at the time. My sister, who's not much older than me, she was fed corn syrup and water as a newborn.
Oh.
That's what the hospital. And so when we had that formula shortage in America and people were suggesting that, people like, you're nuts. They're like, no, actually, that's what they used to feed babies. So it has on there my birth time, date, weight, and all that. And if you know how to read the data, you can see that we were baptized within minutes of being born, which is unusual, right? Because they presumed we die. You know, some nurse or chaplain in the hospital baptized us immediately. So I'm like, thanks. I don't know who you are. Probably very few of them are still alive, right? But thanks for the folks who work in the neonatal unit at crazy times of night and day to keep scrawny alien babies alive. That's the only random act of kindness I've ever planned, right? The rest are like, oh, this cool thing happened today.
Well, I'm very much glad that you and your twin are alive and well. I didn't even know you were a twin. That's so cool.
Yes, we call each other's little organ bank.
That is really cute.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have at my disposal and vice versa.
Is your twin also creative like you are?
My twin has a PhD in colonial American history with a specialty in material culture and a subspecialty in vermin control.
Wow.
So no, we do very different things, which I think is why we're friends. There was never any competition between us, right? We were very different from the get-go. So she spent many years as a curator at Stonewall Jackson House, which, by the way, they loved a little girl from Boston as the curator of a Southern Generals Museum. She worked at VMI and in some of the institutions there. So, we're pretty different. I mean, aside from the DNA.
That is very neat. I'm actually also a preemie baby myself. So I feel you, the preemie love.
Well, and like we were like mutantly small for a very long time. I remember in first grade we were marked because we're twins, right? And we're tiny. We were marched around to all the other classrooms, like, look at these little freaks. I'm like, I don't like what's happening right now. Sister Christine, why are you dragging us around? um, around about fourth or fifth grade, we sort of just were short and not weensy. And so I sort of got past the why are you so small? Preemie conversation.
Yep. Understandable.
I
Understandable.
do always wonder though, do you think our sign is when we were born or when we should have been born?
Oh, at least for my personality, I'm born in July. I was supposed to be born in November. I'm most definitely a Cancer for sure.
So we are Sagittarius, but we're not. We're the new one, right? Which I love because it sounds like a character name out of The Matrix. And I have no connection to that whatsoever, to Sagittarius, which is what got me thinking, like, maybe they got it wrong until I got wind of the Chinese zodiac. We're monkeys, and I am absolutely a monkey. I am 100% monkey. So I'm like, okay, maybe there is something to this.
That's my one of my favorite parts of going to a Chinese restaurant are the menus with the
Yeah.
horoscope. Yeah.
Where you get to see what you want. And one of the things that I appreciate about the Chinese zodiac is it's fairly positive. I mean, it talks about what your positive traits are. Maybe one or two little, maybe you can be argumentative, right? But they're not as nearly as negative as the positive ones. And then it talks about who you're probably compatible with. And you can be like, oh, yeah, my best friend so-and-so is an ox and we are compatible. So I appreciate a positive spin on your destiny.
Indeed. Are you by any chance like oddly superstitious about your fortune cookie fortune? Because I am oddly superstitious about it.
Interesting. I am not the. I am very excited by positive omens. Heads up penny. Yeah, boy. Right. I will not only pick up a heads up penny, I'll give it to somebody else and double the luck. But negative like black cats and ladders doesn't impact me at all. So I do appreciate and steer towards the positive stuff. So if my fortune cookie is positive, I'm like, yep, obviously. But if it's negative, I just eat the cookie and dismiss it entirely.
There you go. That's a good healthy attitude to have.
Well, one of my favorite scenes in The Mummy. Remember the scene where the mummy's about to eat the little squirrely guy, and he has a necklace. And on the necklace, he has the symbol for many, many religions, right? And he's like holding up a cross, and that doesn't impact the mummy at all. And he's holding up the moon, right? And that doesn't. And he holds up the Star of David, and the mummy's like, oh, and he puts him down. He's like, the Jews. I'm down with that. And the mummy doesn't kill him yet because then I'm like, I like picking and choosing whichever like suits your needs. I'm down with that. So yes, I choose you, monkeys, Sagittarius, whatever.
I think I'm a rat in the Chinese zodiac. I'm like, oh, great.
No, but all of them have positive characteristics.
True, true. I like to think of myself as pizza rat specifically from the New York subway.
Right, yeah, like that guy's famous. That guy, like or girl, like he made do. I feel like he probably shared.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of honor in Pizza Rat.
Indeed. This is one of my absolute favorite questions, and it is, what is your favorite and least favorite parts about the creative process, or whether or not you even consider it a process?
Like any process, like for anything that is a process, there's pros and cons, right? There's always things that you perceive as blockades, expense reports and budgets, and that paint is illegal in America, right? And those sorts of things. So what I like about the best parts, and this could be cultural, right? It could be just the bosses that I've had in the past, is how inclusive it is. Really, when at the front ends of a conversation, when you're brainstorming, it is very inclusive. And from the intern to the VP, everyone's throwing ideas on the table, and they're all taken in seriousness. As you get towards the end of a project, and there's a creative director who's like, "No, this is the direction." There's less of that, and you contribute in that direction, right? But I appreciate that on the front end, really everybody believes they can participate. One of the odd things, and I guess this might be my least favorite, is everybody thinks they should be a creative director. And at first I thought this was an internship entry-level challenge where 3, 4, 5 months in, students like file complaints like, I really thought I'd be a creative director by now. I'm a mechanical engineer. Why am I not? And I'm like, because that's like literally not your job. Like, why did you think that would be? And so I met with HR, and I'm like, we have this mismatch of expectations. Over 50% of our interns complained this summer that they should be in the creative executive suite meetings with no skill set whatsoever, right? They don't have any drawing, art, scene work, story, none of those foundational skill sets. And I said, we need to do, I don't know how, but we really need to think about expectations, how we communicate it. And then HR brought out like their files, and they're like, no, this is an issue across the board. It's not just an entry-level intern issue, which was the folks I work with, so that's where I saw it. They're like, senior accounting executives want creative in their title. I'm like, that is the worst department to have creative in their title. And so that's frustrating because a lot of people are disillusioned and they're mad and they stomp out. And you're like, but why did you think that would be what your job was, right? You were an intern at General Motors. You know what an engineer is. You became a ride vehicle intern with Disney. Like how, and it's really just hopes and dreams, right? It's like people aspire to the thing that they love, regardless of whether or not it's legitimate. So it's frustrating to have so much optimism and enthusiasm and then hit this wall of like demoralization and mad and you owe me. And I will never tell a 19-year-old your career path isn't possible. And so I'll say, can you point to somebody who does what you do, and we'll talk about their path and how you might get there. And so the number one most popular, Joe Rohde. Everybody wants to be Joe Rohde. I'm like, great, that's a 45-year path. Let's talk about that. And somebody once mentioned Jason Grant. Great. He sits right there. He's art director at the time. He was art director for Epcot. And then he moved over to be the lead art director for the Epcot decade, a 10-year creative plan. And I'm like, here's how he got there. He did this. He did this. He worked in Chicago at the Field Museum. He was a graphic designer. He worked here. He's now overseas. He draws very little anymore, right? He oversees the drawers, right? And I'm like, great. So there's the path. So let's talk about how many years, how he got there. And the person I was talking to, but I was looking for his job like tomorrow. And at that point, I'm like, get out. And so that disconnect is persistent. It's a 20 plus year disconnect, and I don't see us. So providing more realistic expectations of what the job is, what the salary is, neither are great. The
Mhm.
hours are tough. The salary, particularly for creative entities, is low, but you can be a plumber or you can make fountains. You can be a carpenter or you can build castles, right? This foundational skill set is fairly similar. We're telling stories in those spaces, so you choose. You wanna build mini malls or castles? It's all a
Mhm.
hammer and nail and some really beautifully sculpted cement. But it is getting better, right? The Themed Entertainment Association has student groups. There's 7 degrees that I know of, 6 creative, 1 technical. UNLV has a engineering technology degree. There's hundreds of minors and tracks and other ways to get into the industry. So hopefully that's really helpful in terms of setting expectations as to where the jobs are, what the salary is, what a legitimate career path looks like, what working for a project-based business looks like, how many months of the year are you likely not to work because your project wrapped. Theater students get this.
Mhm.
Film students get this. Themed entertainment folks do not. In many ways, because the park is still there, right? When you're in theater and your show wraps and it goes away, next week somebody else is on stage. In themed entertainment, when your construction wraps and you cut the ribbon and yay, it's still there. Like, so that's why it's hard for folks to digest that they maybe have to leave and move to another project.
Would you say that's one of the biggest misconceptions in your field?
Absolutely. Two big misconceptions: that Disney's a big company, so it must pay well. Nope, it's a creative branch, and it pays. I mean, don't get me wrong. Put me through grad school and bought me a house in California, the condo. um, but it pays far less, particularly if you have any technical skill sets. It pays far less than other jobs in with that skill set. But it's also way more fun. And then also the amount of work. Bob Iger says recently, oh, $17 billion getting turned on. People are like, great, I can start tomorrow. Well, that money doesn't get turned on the next day, right? There has to be plans and then the creative process, and then you bring on the production team. And so people are just very antsy for things to get back to normal, whatever that is.
Mhm.
So many folks lost their jobs in autumn of 2020
Yeah.
and are kind of hanging around waiting for that job to come back, and it won't. So, we have friends who have turned down interesting opportunities because they keep hoping that the job they had will come back. And then friends who see their job posted online, like, what the heck? They didn't call me. I'm like, yeah, no, they wouldn't have. It was 2 years ago. um, so that's really hard as well to see good friends struggling,
Yeah. Yeah.
but both actually, fiscally, and also like ideologically, like how they had defined themselves no longer exists.
What is one of the biggest pieces, or even, I guess, most important pieces of advice you like to give your students?
There's a couple, and the degree I'm with right now is a BS in art, which is very rare, a Bachelor of Science in Art. It's a professional degree. And it's about how important all the other stuff is, right? The classwork gives you a framework for skill sets and competencies, right? And some workshops and projects where you get some experience. The stuff around that, like how you do the thing, how do you brainstorm? How do you collaborate effectively? How do you do original research to inform your projects? How do you concisely and then less concisely pitch original ideas, right? Like those are all the skill sets around the skill sets that are very important. Reputation, what is it and why does it matter? Because the folks on either side of you, you are most likely going to end up working with at some point. And if you were a great teammate who always came through, they will remember that. And if not, they will remember that. I think one of the biggest value adds is joining an industry association. I don't care if it's the Bread Bakers of America, which, by the way, is a thing that meets every other year. um, but something other, like if you take the same classes as your classmates, do the same projects, and I'm reviewing you, you're all the same, right? It's just very bland. Anything you can do to differentiate yourself and connecting to industry associations, ideally connected to your major or what job you want,
Mhm.
you just get so much richer information, the news sources that you're getting, the job opportunities, the links to videos and stuff. I mean, I have an Ed Catmull lecture to watch that's being streamed online tonight that I got notice of through some association I belong to. So joining industry associations, developing your soft skills, realizing that there's only 24 hours in a day, 8 of which hopefully you're sleeping. If you need to do something new, like join a club, there's something that you're going to not do. And what is that? You can't just keep piling it on, right? You have
Mhm.
to very judiciously pick and choose. One of my students this semester, who's a rock star, Around about week 2 or 3, I said, why are you, two students, I said, because I asked, is it okay if I show their work to other folks as this is what I was looking for? Because that can sometimes embarrass students. So I asked ahead of time. And I said, can either of you articulate why you're awesome? One has been in college for 2 years and then had to leave to work. And then he just came back. And so he has worked. He understands punching a time clock. He understands deliverables. And so that maturity shows. And the other's like, you think I have my act together? And I'm like, yeah. He took a semester off because he felt he didn't have his act together. And he just like focused and prioritized. And here's what my goals are now. Finish this, go to school, do that. And so this is his first semester back after that refocusing effort. And he's killing it. I'm like, whatever you're doing, it's working. And so both of them are about what is priorities and where do you put your attention and focus to get the thing that you want. Because university, like you're 4 or 5 years at university, you never have more access to assets, resources, expertise, and mates than you do when you're on a college campus. And once you graduate and roll out of that, those options and those connections drastically diminish. So sort of starting to work on those while you're at university is great. And everybody loves students. Everybody is happy to talk to a student, even crab apples. I've introduced my students to some folks and I'm like, they're usually not on the list because they're kind of grumpy, but this is absolutely a guy you want to talk to. And the students are like, no, they were great. And I'm like, okie dokie. 99.9% of the folks I'll connect my students with are a delight. 1 or 2 are grumpy.
I was wondering, what is the biggest surprise you've had in your career so far?
I mean, I think a lot of folks will answer similarly that it was at first, it was early in your career when you realized what you did or didn't do, right? So when we were installing the Aladdin Magic Carpet VR ride at Epcot Center, late June 1994, interventions at Epcot was all brand new, was all being built, and we were one of the things going in there. And so we spent a lot of time, there was 9 or 6 graduate students who were hired as interns to help run that facility. And we spent a lot of time getting up to speed on the technology, right? The SGI Onyx boxes, the Crystal River 3D sound, the display, which actually wasn't stereoscopic, and why that was. And so like we really had it drilled into us, the innovation, how remarkable it was that this was a space you could fly in, like wherever. So we had 2 of the magic carpets were on motion basis, looked like 2 big old salad bowls moving around, and 2 that were not. And we were studying the difference, motion sickness and perception wise, 2 versus 2. We had one that was wheelchair accessible. So you straddled them all like a motorcycle. And so you would lift the seat up and pull it back and you could just pull your wheelchair in. So we had a family come through, a mother, father, 2 kids. And the boy, probably early teens, he had lost half of his body in a fire. So half his face, his ear, 1 arm, and 1 leg was gone. And he had a wheelchair that he pushed with a push lever, which was like an old toy that we had in my house, because he couldn't push with 2 wheels, right? He only had 1 arm. So he and his family came through, saw the show, went out the back door, came back around the front to see it again. The dad and the kid, mom and the sister are like, we out. And so several times they saw the show out the back in the front. And so he asked one of the operations cast members, could you maybe pick me to ride the ride? And she's like, I'm sorry, sweetie, you need 2 hands to steer the steering wheel. And he said, okay, maybe pick my dad and he'll tell me. And I'm like, oh God, I've been on the job a month and I'm going to cry in front of guests. He says, can you pick my dad and he'll tell me about it? And I'm like, this is a research lab. Pick the kid, right? This is exactly dreadlocks, bald, like huge head with piercings. Like that's what this research lab is for. Can everyone fit into this thing? How do they see? How are they comfortable? So they went to pull the seat off for he could put his wheelchair in. He's like, no, I can do it. And he flops out of his wheelchair, does the worm across the floor, right? And he gets himself up on just fine. And then he proceeds to fly like this, elbow as a fulcrum on the thing. You absolutely did not need 2 hands to fly this thing. His parents are stunned, right? Everybody's like, this kid who doesn't have mobility in the real world suddenly could go wherever he wanted in the virtual world. And I'm watching this and his parents are crying. And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm fine. And I'm like, oh, that's what we do. Yeah, there's X million dollars worth of Onyxes in that glass room back there, beeping and booping and heating the joint up. But that's only to get here. What we do is this thing with this kid right now. And once you realize that, it's a little easier to make hard decisions. One of the phrases that fairly, like in the past 10 or 15 years, come up at Imaginneering only internally was happy people make the world a better place. So if you ever have a design challenge about A or B, and if you just say, happy people make the world a better place, which of these choices will make our guests happier? that's always the safer bet. So that realization really helps move forward. It's not, I'm not the CEO, right? So it's not about capitalizing revenue, right? It's not like which option is going to sell more. There are people whose job that is. That was not my job. And I'm like, man, I am so lucky that I figured that out early. And then we had years later, we had a similar conversation with the US Patent Office. Stuart Langley, who runs our patent program, where he teaches everyone how to make patents. A lot of folks think that their ideas aren't particularly remarkable, but he's like, nope, they are. Patent that. The U.S. Patent Office was rejecting a lot of things, and because they're like, why would you patent that? And so we hosted them to Disneyland. We had about 3 or 4 hours of lecture and workshops on here's what we do and how we do it, and then we took them up into the park. And we're looking at some pretty remarkable projection technology we have in the castle that came out of our Zurich lab. And then we tell the patent guys, look at that kid. That is what the patent is for, is to protect the look on her face. It's not, oh, sure, there's light on the castle, whatever. That impact that has is why Disney wants to patent that thing. And they're like, yep, nope, got it. And we haven't really had many problems with the patent office rejecting us since.
Those are some wonderful stories, and I am sure that you have dozens more. I would love, love, love to have you back on the show. So, but before we go, I'm going to ask 2 questions. One is serious and one is quirky. Which one would you like first?
Let's go serious and then end on quirky, because we don't want to end on serious.
Okay. In your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
In some regards, it means sacrifice, right? Because it's never going to be super well paid. But in many ways, man, I have always loved my job. 60, 80-hour weeks, cold, dirty. I have always loved my job, and that is not a luxury that many people have. I come from a giant family, and my siblings they get the Sunday scaries, right? Where they don't want to go to work on Monday. They get paid very well. They have nice houses. They go on vacation, but they hate their day-to-day existence. And that, I think, is very lucky that I, as a creative, love what I do. And once in a while, somebody will try and talk you into like a sales position or fundraising, and I'll give it the go. And I'm like, oh, thank God this is not what I chose to do, because I'm not good at it and I don't like it. Other people are, but I'm like, oh my God, can you imagine if this was my job? I'm a terrible salesperson. Yeah, so both rewarding and terrifying is the creative process. And you pick, right? And at different points in your life, different things are a priority. Salary sometimes really matters. Where in the country you work sometimes really matters. And so wherever most of those variables align with your goals, choose the creative one. But understand that you are making sacrifices and taking hits as a result.
Excellent. Here's the quirky one. If you could have dinner with any person, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you have for the meal?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I like cooking. So I would cook this meal. And I'm not particularly interested in very famous people. I just like normal people who have done interesting things. I remember the first time I was asked this question was in high school. And the gentleman I chose was a one-legged Terry Fox. Terry Fox was a Canadian long-distance runner with one leg. And I was on the cross-country team in high school at the time. And my coach ran the Boston Marathon every year, and we would stand and scream our brains out for him, right? A couple years he paced himself with the woman who won the women, so he's in ESPN and everything because he was next to her every time they took the picture. And there's a famous, towards the end of the Boston Marathon is the Heartbreak Hill, which takes a lot of people out, right? It kills you. It breaks your heart. It's a very steep hill. And my coach George couldn't finish. A couple miles ahead, actually, he couldn't finish, but he knew we were waiting for him there, so he sort of run to that spot just to see his team. And he was devastated, right, that he couldn't finish. And Terry Fox, who was running the marathon, came out and talked to him. And I'm like, who is this guy who chose to uplift my coach? I mean, Heartbreak Hill, I imagine, is much harder for a guy with one leg than a guy with two legs. And so I knew his name, but I didn't know that that's who this guy was. And so after that, I'm like, that's the kind of people I want to spend time with. And he made sure George was good. He spoke to all of us, and we're like, oh my God, that's Terry Fox. That's Terry Fox, the runner. And then off he went on his way. And I'm like, that's the guy I want to have dinner with. And people like that. I'm going to click on Terry Fox on Wikipedia, where he's at. 1980, he was running with a prosthetic. Oh, he died in 1981. That's not. I shouldn't have looked him up. But that is somebody to aspire to, is the people who make people happy, because happy people make the world a better place. And that small conversation he had with George was a big deal to George, and it was a big deal to us as athletes and as students. And George Rose, by the way, came to my dad's funeral. And so I'm like, what's Mr. Rose doing here? And it's interesting because he lived in my same town, right? And my mother was so excited. She's like, I think Mr. Rose is here. He taught history and was cross country and track coach. And he's like, did you all forget that I had 6 of you in my, because I know he was my coach for 4 years in high school, one of many teachers and coaches. But he's like, yeah, no, the Haley girls, I had a lot of them. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. We had a different impact on you than you had on us. So, paying it forward kind of thing. But I used to host giant themed dinner parties.
Mm-hmm.
I could have 13 guests because I had 13 chairs. That's how many people I could seat. Every Christmas, I hosted a Hallmark holiday movie mocktacular event. Once COVID hit, I started doing those virtually. And so I could have way more people. I could have 50, right? Because it was virtual and I wasn't cooking for anyone. But I do enjoy people who like to show up to those events and participate, right? I give out points that mean nothing. But like if you cook something themed or dress themed or play, like you get points that mean nothing at my dinner parties.
Well, that sounds like a good time.
I'll let you know when the upcoming one is.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Well, any other things you'd like to tell our listeners?
I just really want to encourage everyone, regardless of where you are in life, is to make use of your networks and reach out to people. Thank people more often, even if it's just, Margaret, I read your book. It was really cool. People like to be helpful. People like to be resources. Take advantage of that. It builds community and it gets you expertise and experience that you might not otherwise have.
A great example is this. You're on the show, and we connected because of an amazing program, cough cough, many years ago. Well, MK, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Listeners, please check the show notes for her official biography.
Yep. And by all means, reach out. I am one of those people you can connect with. I have created massive amounts of resources for students when it was harder to figure out what this industry was and how to get involved. And I am delighted to share them with you.
Excellent. Wonderful. If you're a person in the creative arts who happens to be doing or wanting to do something along the lines of what MK does, definitely reach out. You'll find her links in the socials. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.